It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice right now, right here. Appreciate you riding with us today. For the record, and I apologize, I have to apologize to you, the listeners, because, boy, I got a bug over the weekend, and it just knocked the stuffing out of me. I apologize, and you can hear it in my voice. It really knocked me for a loop. I don't get sick very often, but when I do, it's usually a doozy. So thank you for your patience and your well wishes. I am very grateful and appreciative of all of the nice gestures of get wells and emails and phone calls and comments that I had. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our friends over at 99.3 on Big Country for their help in getting over this couple of days as well, and for carrying America's Voice Now for our listenership in the South Central Missouri area. Thank you. Those of you who are joining us on our website, I'm glad to see that folks are utilizing that venue, if you will. It's an opportunity for you to stream the show live in that format. You can do it either audio or video. And as usual, I see a bunch of folks on there. I see Baltimore on there this morning, and Richmond, Fort Walton Beach, Huntington, Lincoln, I suppose that's Nebraska, Cameron, I'm not even quite sure where that is, Branson, Springfield. I see folks all over the place. Thank you. Appreciate your riding with us that way. And for those of you who are on Patriot FB, you guys have almost become like a little family to me, and I appreciate that as well. All right. So enough of the glad-handing. Let's talk about a couple of topics this morning. I posted them up on all of our different various media outlets. This morning I want to take some time to talk about, in the first half of the show, which is going to take up the first two quarters, the PACT. Now, you've heard me mention this before, and the reason I'm throwing it out here this morning is because there's a couple of things that we need to address about this, and time is of the essence. First of all, I want to explain to you what it is and how it works. I did get some responses from some folks that caught the episode last week. And it was the tail episode, so those who don't have the patience to sit through an hour and a half or whatever of video perhaps missed that segment. Those who did respond, you had some great ideas, some great criticisms, constructive ones, I must say. There was nobody that tossed the idea under the bus. But I want to expand and expound on it a little bit more today, and I want to explain a little bit about the rationalization. First of all, can it save America? And the answer to that, I believe, is yes. We're going to explore a little bit how that will work and what the issues are. But secondarily, I want you to understand thoroughly the concept of how it works, so that you can begin to discuss it, one, amongst yourselves and within your own circle of influence. But also, in addition to that, you have an opportunity to export the idea to Tea Party organizations, Constitution Party organizations, Libertarian, and so forth and so on. I think at this point, we have an opportunity to put this thing into play for the 2014 elections with a little bit of creative alliance and allegiance and a little bit of elbow grease. And so I want to expound on that. Our third topic is going to be NSA, law enforcement, and the rise of the police state. I know that, I suspect that some people say, man, you hit that issue all the time. Well, the reason I do, folks, is because we are literally at a crisis point here right now in our environment, where I think if we don't recognize how far down the path we are towards a complete despotism in government, that we may not actually have an opportunity to understand what we can do to return or recover from it before it's too late. I want to talk about a couple of different issues that are out there, not the least of which is a series of actions that are taken on behalf of government, both the NSA, Border Patrol, the court systems, everything. And then our fourth topic is going to be Obamacare bailouts. Now, for those of you who aren't aware of the implications of this, there are bailouts that are being scheduled right now to bail the insurance companies out. For the record, 79% of all the people who are signing up are qualifying for subsidies. That's a staggering number. And the youth is not signing up the way that they were expected to or hoped that they would. And the healthy are not signing up. The people who are signing up, and it's hitting a lot of people's predictions right on the head, is those people who've never had insurance, and or those people who could never have afforded insurance, and or those people who had pre-existing conditions that precluded them from having insurance. Of course, unfortunately, all of them qualify for subsidies. I mean, in some markets, even as much as a family of four who earns up to $96,000 a year can get subsidies from the federal government. And what that's going to require is that we bail out the insurance companies for the losses. So let's get into our first topic on the PACT, because I think this is important, and I really want to cover this issue thoroughly. I want you to understand it, and I want you to be able to ask intelligent questions of yourself and me so that we can try to drag this idea to the next level. When I look over the wreckage of the American political landscape that's out there, I see the myriad of efforts that have been presented in an attempt to try to put integrity back into our electoral process. I see processes out there that, like the Article 5 conventions and the Convention of States efforts, and I applaud that. I have concerns about it, but I applaud the idea. I applaud the constructive action. I look at issues like Colonel Riley, who is looking forward to an American spring come April, where he wants to create another idea I posed back in 2011 for massive peaceful civil disobedience in an effort to restore order by force if necessary. And I don't mean physical force. I mean the force of massive amounts of Americans who say, we're on strike until you guys stop this. I also see other efforts, which is the age-old tried and untrue method of let's just continue to write our congressmen, let's continue to plead and beg these people to treat us in a manner which is commensurate with their duty to us, which, frankly, they have abandoned a long time ago. All of it brings me to the Jeffersonian quote that sums it all up. In questions of power, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. Let's read that again so that we understand it. In questions of power, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. Well, we see how well that's worked with our current crop of politicians. They ignore the Constitution, they end run it, they redefine it, and they commit all manner of mischief in an effort to thwart it and defeat its point and its purpose. The Constitution is a guidebook, but it requires ethical and moral people to be running with the guidebook, if you will, to be utilizing it as a map. Excuse me, a roadmap. The problem is that power corrupts. That's the old saying, right? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And no matter how often we look at our political landscape, we see that we have no control over these people. The power that they have become addicted to is so enormous at this point that trying to ask them to voluntarily give it up is like sitting there and trying to tell a drug addict who's living in a pharmacy, hey, give up voluntarily your drug habit. He says, I'm not going to do that because I'm surrounded by it and I've got an unlimited supply here. No better example of that phrase, power corrupts, can be found than in our current modern politician, in our political environment. So basically what happened was I sat down and I was trying to figure out how to put a new spin on some old ideas. unfortunately, it should go without saying to everybody here that it's a sad day when the guidebook of the Constitution and ethics and morals and integrity and honor are not enough to keep our politicians corralled, if you will, or fenced in, and to keep them on the straight and narrow voluntarily. But, of course, the folly of men knows no boundaries when it comes to power, influence, and money. Those are corrupting influences. So I set about to devise a method that would be acceptable to the people who seek to obtain office with all of the best of intentions, only later on to be seduced by the aforementioned afflictions of power, corruption, or influence, money, and power, and the corruption angle. And the problem is that I think most politicians at some point step into this idea with, and I'm going to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think many times they go into the idea of running for office with the preconceived notion that they can go in there and do some good. Now, I know that there is those who would argue, and I'm sure there are those, in fact, I know there are those who go in there with the idea that this is a careerist move and I can live a life of leisure on a government dole and have privilege and influence in my life if I do this. But I do suspect that there are a significant number of people who actually go in there with the right mentality and the right attitude. We saw that in 2010 with the Tea Party candidates, many of whom have now been absorbed into the body, and they've been hit by the affliction of power, corruption, influence, and money. Now, we've seen efforts before by guys like Norquist with the anti-tax pledge. And we've seen Gingrich's contract with America. And each of these offered some sort of a contracted commitment for a stated position. Grover Norquist's issue was commit that you will not, and pledge that you will not initiate new taxes. And if you do, we're going to vote you out. We'll make a concerted effort to put the money forth and the effort forth and grassroots effort to remove you from office. It's had some effect, but it's a very singly focused issue that really doesn't cover the gamut of the corruption that we see in D.C. Newt Gingrich's concept wasn't really effective in the long term because I think ultimately, the concept is if there's no teeth to a contract, what good is it? I mean, if all we're relying on is more promises, and we already heard all the promises in the first place when you ran for office in the initial instance, what makes me think you're going to keep those promises? The problem is that, and it's unfortunate, but the Constitution is a form of a contract itself. But none of these agreements or these guidelines have teeth. No, there's no penalty if you violate the tenets of these agreements. Some states actually have a recall process out there. And that recall process would enable you to rein in those politicians who run amok. A case in point was Colorado recently. They passed that anti-gun legislation, and three elected officials were recalled. But some states don't have a recall or recall ability. In my state, we do not. And there's no recall for federal senators and federal representatives. So some nations, and some parliamentary governments have something called the no confidence vote. Now, I'll be interviewing General Vallely later on today or tomorrow in reference to his concept of proposing a no confidence vote. And a no confidence vote essentially forces oppositional groups to get together and band together to create a reform. However, all of these processes are all fraught with their own levels of corruption, their own forms of failure. They create a period of chaos, while in the case of a no confidence vote, we don't really know who's in charge. And during the case of these other types of methodologies, these contract systems, there is a period in time in which chaos reigns. They take a long time. They cost money if you're going to try to recall an elected official. And worse, all of them allow the same behavior to continue unabated. And that's tragic because that behavior creates and causes immense damage, not only to our political and our social and our fiscal landscape, but to the faith and the electorate's belief in the system. See, most people, if you ask today, do you vote? And if they say no, and you ask them why, they'll tell you because it doesn't matter. My vote doesn't count. These people don't do what we ask them to do anyway. They don't represent us. So, ergo, the PACT. The PACT stands for the Political Accountability, Contract, and Trust. Now, that's an acronym. And the PACT is basically a system to shortcut the process. It allows virtually immediate containment of bad behavior and actions that are contrary to the electorate. It works for local, regional, state, and federal elections. I don't care whether you're running for mayor, or whether you're running for city council, or you're running for state representative, or you're running for federal office. The same PACT will apply for all of these conditions. The idea is that its goal is to end the self-serving careerist mentality in politics. Because even though people go in with the best of intentions and say, I'm only going to run for this term or that term, oftentimes their excuse when the term ends is, well, there's still work for me to be done. And that, of course, ladies and gentlemen, is really not truth. What that is rationale for betraying a promise. The idea of this is actually rather simple, and I've discussed it with a lot of folks, and I'm actually kind of surprised that wherever I've discussed it and whomever I've discussed it with, the response has been interesting. First and foremost, most people, there's a light that goes on when I discuss how the PACT works. And secondarily, the general response has been they're stunned by the simplicity of it and enthusiastic about its success. I'm frankly surprised that nobody else has come up with it because, heck, I'm not a very sharp guy. So here's how it works. The PACT, the Political Accountability, Contract, and Trust, is merely a contract with the electorate and a group of pre-designated accountability partners. But it comes with a twist. The terms take the form of a standard contract. So those terms might include things like voluntary term limits, a commitment not to vote on any bill that these elected officials haven't read, a commitment to refuse any and all lobbying money. And this should, by the way, be a basic tenet of it. No campaign funds and no PACs, political action committees. Those are merely slush funds. And a pledge to not run for a second or additional office after the pre-designated period of this term, whatever this contract is covering. The idea is to eliminate careerist politics. So here's the rub. Because otherwise, this is just another promise to be good, right? The teeth in this thing is a pre-executed resignation letter that is held in trust, and thereby the phrase trust, by the accountability partners that are part of the overall PACT. These accountability partners hold a pre-executed resignation letter that will only be used during the term of office if the candidate violates the actual contractual elements of the contract. And all the APs, and that's how I'm referring to them as the accountability partners, they're APs. All the APs have to do is simply date the pre-signed letter and submit it to the press. And they do so as, quote, liquidated damages. Now, anyone who's familiar with contractual law recognizes that liquidated damages eliminate the possibility of taking the thing to court and having to go through all kinds of negotiations or, I can't think of the right word now, but excuse me. The idea being that this is not something that they can contest at a later date, right? And so and basically all they have to do at that point is give the candidate 48 hours notice that the press is going to appear, and they're going to have to explain why they've resigned. Now, the premise of this is based on what our founders gave as their original intent for public office. First and foremost, their goal was that all individuals who were operating as public servants and that's where the phrase came from, should actually operate as public servants. And that they should desire to do the right thing while they're in office as citizen legislators for a short term. In other words, they consider this their civic duty. They step into the job, they do the job, and then they vacate it and go back to whatever they did before, whether that was a businessman or whether that was a salesman or whether that was a guy who ran a construction company or whatever the case may be. The goal, of course, is that there's a turnover and no one is imbued with too much power over too long a period of time, and that they don't have enough time for them to be in office long enough to be seduced. Now, once, of course, these people get into politics, they get seduced. They get seduced by the power, by the money, by the undue influence, and it's irresistible. It's irresistible for even the most stalwart individual because their mentality and their thinking changes once they've arrived in office. You see it in virtually everyone who runs for anything. And I don't care whether it's dog catcher on up to the president. It's the same exact thing over and over and over. And we should stop denying it and recognize it when it happens. We're going to touch on the second part of this in just a moment when we come back. We're going to take a break. I've got 1 minute, and I just want to kind of thank our sponsors. You can make sure that, please, do your best when you see our sponsors to thank them for supporting America's Voice Now, because these are the folks that keep the show on the air. The Battery Station over at Washington Avenue. They're on 303 Washington Avenue in West Plains. You can find them on the web at batterystation.com, 417-257-7799. The law offices of Jason Henry on the Square in West Plains does criminal law, and he also handles federal and state cases. He is at 10 Court Square in West Plains, 417-256-4100. Also, the Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop, also located on the Square in West Plains. They're at 417-257-1776. Everything you could ever desire for the smoker can be found there. Also, while you're at it, you can get your hair cut over there at Wits End Classic Barbershop, right in front of the Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop. Great place to get your hair cut. He cuts mine. It's $10 for a haircut. You can't beat that. And also does a hot lather shave with a towel and the whole 9 yards. So, and then last but not least is our friends over at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. They have a great lunch special, and there's a pizza bar and a salad bar, and it's open buffet. Make sure that you get there. And on Tuesday night, kids eat free for family night. So, okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the idea of the PACT and why it matters, and then more importantly, what are the pros and some of the benefits that come out of it. I'm sure there are plenty of cons we can come up with, but what I want to talk about is the basic premise of what it accomplishes, because I think it's critically important that we understand that and that we build on what those are, okay? I want to also talk about the makeup of what is the accountability partner system, because it's a hinge pin of the process, and we have to make sure that it's functional. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. You can also find us at patriotfb.com. You can also find us at facebook.com/America's Voice Now and youtube.com/America's Voice Now. Please make sure that you share our ideas and our videos and our stories and our episodes with your friends and those in your circle of influence so that we can help spread the word. We'll be back in just a moment. All right. Boy, I tell you what, my voice is rough today. For those of you out there listening, I am grateful that you're able to bear with my fingernails on a chalkboard voice. I'm sorry. It'll get better, I promise. Just stick with me. Okay, so we were talking about the PACT, and I want to get a little deeper into the idea of what the purpose is behind it and how it functions, because the problem that we have is that there's nothing really to hold these people accountable once they get into office. They can make us all the promises they want, but once they get into office, there basically is nothing to contain them. And the PACT essentially does that. We know that once they get into office, they become fully enveloped in their addiction, right? They become so thoroughly engaged and so fully engaged in their addiction that, you can't tear them away from it with white horses and pry bars. So the real issue for us is how do we make sure that we can accomplish that task or eliminate their desire to get into office and stay in office in the first place? And over a period of time, over a successive period of elections, accomplish a few different things. But first, let's get to the accountability partners, because I know some people have had concerns about this. By the way, you'll note that this conversation and the entire concept here is universal in nature. This is not a political, ideological issue. This does not work on Republicans only or Democrats only or anybody else. This is a bipartisan or nonpartisan approach. In fact, as we move forward, you're going to find that one of the real intended consequences of this is that it will ultimately disenfranchise the duopoly party system. Now, as soon as a lot of Republicans and stalwart Democrats hear that, the gnashing of teeth and the wringing of hands begins. I don't really care. Frankly, this is something that we must force upon them, America, because they're never going to do this willingly. But if they want our support, they will use this PACT. That's our leverage. If you don't sign a PACT, then we're not going to vote for you, and we don't care what party you're for. The accountability partners themselves have to be individuals, first and foremost. They have to have no party affiliation with the candidate, nor political, familial, or business connections with the candidate. They have to be clean hands, long arm's length transaction. As such, they should be chosen through a lottery system in which individuals who are civic-minded people who don't necessarily want to run for office but do want to act as kind of watchdogs of the republic will say, hey, I'm willing to be an accountability partner. I'm willing to stand up and do the right thing for the country. I'm willing to make sure that when it comes time to overwatch this issue, you can count on me to do the right thing. I'm not interested in running for office. I don't have the time, or I've got a business to run, or I just don't want to get involved in politics. But in terms of a candidacy. But I am interested in politics because the policies that these people put in place affect me and my family and my business and my community and my everything else. So the lottery system can be utilized for APs who choose to act as accountability partners. And they will this will act as, if you will, a counterbalance to the machinations of political life. These people are the ones who are the most heavily affected by the policies involved in politics, so they have a vested interest in doing the right thing. Secondarily, the idea being that we actually want some of the opposing party, if you will, to or opposing ideology to be watchdogs over that particular individual, because they'll be the first one to raise their hand and the last ones to be corrupted. You don't want all conservatives watching a conservative, nor do you want all Democrats watching a liberal. You don't want all, and by the same token, you don't want all liberals who are APs for a conservative. There's got to be some balance there, because you don't want it to be a vindictive issue either. So the concept is that the APs, those people who choose to be accountability partners, would pre-submit their names into a ring, if you will, or a hat, and they would be chosen. Now, the number of them can vary based on the importance of that seat or that chair and or the hierarchical position, because a federal seat, as an example, should have no less than 11 accountability partners, and the number always has to be odd so you can break ties. A seat that may have 9 or maybe 7 might be somebody in a state elected position, whether that be state representative or state senator. You might have a city council or a mayoral slot that has 5. But recognize that the more that number diminishes, the easier it is for the corruption to correspondingly move into the APs. So you want to make sure that the APs are directly correlated to the strength of the position, but that they don't fall below a minimum number. Because once you get below that, the greater the chance that the candidate can sway them from doing their job properly, either with money, influence, power, promises of future remuneration, whatever. It's kind of like the idea of herding cats, right? You can get 1 or 2 cats to do something, but you can't get 10 cats to all do something. Now, the pool of accountability partners should be a mirror image of the electorate and the community that's represented, right? I mean, the goal is this shouldn't just be, as I mentioned earlier, all one ideology over another, kind of, dogging the candidate while in office. Allied party affiliation actually is a negative in this instance, because you can't have the fox guarding the hen house. That's what we have now, right? So, in fact, the best APs will be those who are independent of party affiliation and declare themselves as independents. They're interested in fair and equitable government that gives an opportunity for us to excel to our best opportunity, not to necessarily be oppressed by that government. And of course, the other side is, and one of the arguments I've heard from folks is, well, as soon as you do that, you're talking about party affiliation and independence. That throws it out because everybody's either a Republican or a Democrat. Well, I beg to differ. The truth is that right now, the number of people that currently call themselves independent is at an all-time high because the electorate's fed up with both of the duopoly party members. The beautiful part about this, by the way, is that over succeeding generations of elections, and it doesn't take a whole lot of them, the parties actually will lose power. Their power will wane because their influence becomes less of a factor once the candidate can no longer run for office. In other words, that promise of, well, if you, go along to get along, or if you vote for my bill, I'll vote for your bill, and then when it comes time for re-election, I'll make sure that there's some money in your campaign election fund to accomplish that. All of that goes away. Because if the candidate's not going to run for office again, the party's really not much help to him, and he doesn't have to toe the party line. And this applies to both parties. Moreover, if you have a situation where you feel that this concept of parties dooms the PACT to failure, I would encourage you to recognize the fact that most people who are interested in politics, and those would be the likely candidates to put their hat into the AP ring, are interested in being fair and equitable about what's going on. They don't, I don't think anybody is, much to the chagrin of the claims of one party or the other, nobody wants to throw grandma off the cliff, nor does anybody want to see, the country descend into complete moral, decrepitude. I mean, we all recognize that we're in trouble. I think even the most liberal people recognize that there are some real major problems going on here. And it's important that the APs declare their party affiliations at the time that they put in their application. So one of the other side benefits that comes out of this is you're forcing those people who, well, I shouldn't say forcing, you're engaging those people in the political process that they've been stripped of their engagement capabilities from before. In other words, these people who seek to act as watchdogs, and they are effectively re-engaged in the political process, which they feel alienated from, because our society has left them behind a long time ago. I mean, our entire political landscape is made up of people who are power players or you're nobody. And so it, excuse me, it puts the accountability partners back into a position of authority and power. The idea here is that we're looking for accountability of the candidate, and we're looking for accountability of the partners as well, the accountability partners as well. And if you forgive me stealing it from a Reagan-esque term, it's the old trust but verify concept. This applies to the candidate, but it also applies to the accountability partners. In other words, there has to be a series of alternate or substitute APs, much like the jury system, so that in the event one of the APs may die during the candidate's term in office or may move, maybe their job requires them to leave the town or leave the state or whatever, or maybe, there's an unplanned loss or disability or whatever other issue may disqualify that accountability partner from fulfilling their duty in their role. There has to be substitute and a stand-in accountability partner, much like you would have a stand-in juror that would step in, an alternate. The majority that votes to determine whether or not the terms of the contract have been violated, which would necessitate the nuclear option of submitting the resignation letter, has to be a majority, and it can either be a simple majority, it could be a 2/3 majority, or a 3/4 supermajority. That, I guess, really depends largely on the candidate. I mean, there's nothing about this that they cannot individually change. It's up to the electorate to demand that the contract be strong enough that they feel confident that they can utilize it to draw the candidate back. See, the concept here is essentially this. We want to eliminate trying to go through constitutional amendments for things like term limits and recalls, because it takes years, it costs a lot of money, and there's no assurance we'll ever get it accomplished. And not to mention the fact that the people who are going to be subjected to those limits are the ones who have to vote it into place. Even in the event that we do an Article 5, they're going to throw every roadblock in the way. So the simple solution here is to bypass them altogether and bypass the whole idea of trying to force constitutional amendments, because this can work immediately. It'll work in 2014. It ends party politics. The PACT will strip power from the duopoly system within a few election generational cycles. The idea here is to end the careerist mentality of politics. Our founders endorsed the idea of citizen legislators. They serve a civic tour of duty, and then they go back to whatever they did before. With term limits, the power of the party is diminished greatly. And the concept is that over a short series of elections, attrition will eliminate those who doggedly ignore their constituents and cleave to the power of the party. So this idea of, I'm a party player and the party will continue to protect me, eventually over a short period of time loses its power and by attrition goes away. It ends lobbying. So what this means is it goes a long way to eliminate the corrupting influence of lobbyists. Why? Well, first of all, let's recognize lobbying for what it is. It's bribery. You can call it by any other name. You can be as polite and politically correct as you want, but lobbying is bribery. You are bribing that candidate with campaign election funds or PACT money set aside in a separate PACT that's not subject to election law that they can spend any way they choose. The pledge will rejects lobbying contributions and will accept only private donations from individuals, no corporate donations, and none of that. That takes the money out of the electoral process, and it takes the influence out before the candidate has even stepped into the position. In other words, he doesn't have to sell his soul before he's actually even taken the seat. You wonder why these people can't get into office and stay in office and hold their line, because they've sold their soul before they even get to the finish line, folks, of the election. Excuse me. Now, they have to commit that they're going to refuse PAC slush funds as well. You're not going to, this idea of, well, I'll do it in a 501c4 and it won't be in his name, but we'll spend all the money on his campaigns and, give him power and influence and a blank checkbook that they can run around with and live like lords and dukes and duchesses. That's got to stop. We need to make that kind of a politician an endangered species. And the only way to accomplish that is to get rid of the the lobbying. So this will strip politicians of their incentive to violate the trust of the electorate. If you can't take the money, there's no incentive for you to, and if you can't run for re-election, there's no incentive for you to take the money. You can always take a brown paper bag, but at least we can throw you in jail for that. The idea of ending these endless incumbencies is also a side benefit. The PACT offers unknown political candidates an equal footing with well-known names. How does that work? Well, here's the deal. An incumbent in our current political landscape is reelected about 80 to 86% of the time. The numbers vary, but it's staggeringly high. And yet, Congress has an approval rating of 8%. How can that possibly be? I mean, an approval rating of 8% is the friends and family plan. How is it that with an 8% approval rating, they get reelected 80% of the time? I don't get that. Part of the problem is name recognition. 2, they've done favors for people back home, and those people are then imbued with a desire to continue to see their benefactor now, which is essentially what your congressman has become, your benefactor if you're on the dole-out list, from making remuneration for your votes. So the idea is that an unknown can step in here and say, okay, look, you've seen the election record of candidate ABC. You know, ladies and gentlemen, who are not on his friend list, crony list, that this person has violated the trust of the electorate over and over and over again. So what I'm suggesting to you is that I'm not going to do that, and I'm going to prove it by putting teeth into my promise. If I violate your trust, if I do those things which are against the best interest of the state or my constituency or my region or district or precinct or whatever it is, then you don't have to go to the trouble of recalling me. You don't have to go to the expense and the time of trying to pass a constitutional amendment to term limit me out, allowing me to do untold and wreak untold havoc between now and the time that my new election comes up. And then I've got, by the way, a pork barrel chest just chock full of lobbyist money to try to bury you under negative advertising. This gives the idea of an unknown candidate an opportunity to step up to the plate and say, I am on an equal footing with a candidate who has a track record, because their track record is actually their undoing. That's the truth, folks. Their track records will be their undoing. And here's the beautiful part. It eliminates incumbents by attrition, because these incumbents who are already in office cannot use the PACT. Why? Well, because you can't sign a contract that you've already violated. It's that simple. You cannot sign an agreement that says, I'm not going to do all of these unconstitutional and unethical and immoral things when you've already done them. You can't go back on the promises that you've already given to those who have already put money into your election campaign. They're expecting your performance. They've paid you for it. And so you'd be in a very, very difficult position to try to go back now and change the terms of the agreement that you already have with whoever was lobbying you and bribing you in the first place. The PACT offers unknown candidates a fair platform because the incumbent cannot legally bind themselves with a contract that they've already broken. It's that simple, people. This isn't rocket science. I know everybody wants to make it rocket science because with confusion comes opportunity. With chaos comes an opportunity to stick your foot in the door and work your way in sideways. Our goal should always be to figure out a way to make the obvious very plausible and simple and easy to recognize. So the PACT candidate has to merely announce their contracted pledge and draw the comparison of the incumbent's voting record. And that with that pre-election commitment to honor the principles of the office. Any candidate, by the way, who is refusing to sign a pact is essentially declaring that they have no intention of being held accountable. So it's a winner against that person who would seek to get into office and do the wrong thing, with the wrong intention, with the careerist mentality. Because the electorate can simply say, well, if you're not willing to sign the pact, I guess basically what you're saying to us is, you're not willing to be held accountable. Okay. I can see that we are not going to have enough time in the first two segments to cover this. And so I'm going to take the liberty of pushing off one of the other two subjects, which was the NSA, law enforcement, and the rise of the police state, and the Obamacare bailouts are bankrupting what's left of America. And because we got 5 minutes left in this segment, and I know I can't get wrapped up in this in the next 5 minutes. I know I can't get through this. But I do think it's important that we explore what these benefits are. And I'm sure that there are plenty of detractions, and I haven't yet, outlined all of them. I've put most of this together, and I'm working actually with an attorney on the terms and the conditions of this. So, okay, let's try to wrap up one more, and then when we come back, we'll tag on the next few. The idea of money ruling elections is one of the greatest challenges that any citizen legislator has as they try to go run for office. They're running against an incumbent who has a war chest that is bulging at the seams. And quite honestly, it is bottomless. It's bottomless because the party will do anything to keep their dog in the hunt. They know that this candidate, by experience, has already committed and capitulated to the party platform, to the party stance, to doing the party's bidding versus doing the bidding of the electorate, the people. And so the only way to get money from the parties out of politics, now we've already eliminated it from the lobbyists, but you still have to worry about the party itself. And so the way to accomplish, or the way to eliminate that, is to make sure that these war chests are, for all intents and purposes, dried up. You accomplish that by contractually committing to this predefined term limit. And my suggestion would be on a federal representative slot, because that's a 2-year slot, you'd do 2 terms. That's it. 4 years, you're done, go home, go back to being a baker or a candlestick maker or whatever you were before. On a Senate seat, 1 term, 6 years, you're finished. And after you're done, you don't run for Secretary of State, or you don't run for Attorney General, or you don't jump out of the House and move right into the Senate, or run out of the Senate and jump into the House, or try to become governor. The goal is to not be a careerist politician. That's how we got here, folks. Our job is to keep them accountable. Now, after their term is done, there's nothing that we could theoretically do to hold them to that. But I can tell you that they'd be hard-pressed to stand there and say, I've finished my 2 terms, I'm leaving the House, but I've changed my mind, I'm going to move to the Senate because I still have work unfinished. How many times have we heard that nonsense? Well, it's merely at that point the opposition candidate's job to hold up his PACT and say, I'm sticking to the terms of my PACT, and he or she is not. That individual over there is already violating the terms of their PACT that has just expired. So there's no point in signing a new one with them because we know that it's not worth the paper it's written on. There's a lot of different handcuffs that come with this. And I use that term for a reason, because our goal is what? To bind men down with the chains of, in this case, a contract. Okay. We're going to take a quick break. We've got 30 seconds before the music kicks in. I just want to thank our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop. Appreciate you guys. You're a great group of patriots, and I enjoy meeting with you guys and getting in there. I do stop in there from time to time, folks. So if you'd like to go in there, I'm not a big cigar smoker, but I go in there and chat with the folks once in a while, and I love seeing new faces in there. So you can reach them at 417-257-1776, and they have virtually anything and everything that you could want for cigar and tobacco and pipe smoking. Also, Jason Henry Law Offices, also on Court Square. You can reach him at 417-256-4100. He does personal injury work for automobile accidents. He does state and federal criminal cases, including specialty and firearms cases and drug cases. He also handles the DUI and things like that. So you can feel free to call him at 417-256-4100. Make sure that you see Jason over at Wits End Classic Barbershop. He is a great young fella and does a great job cutting my hair. At least I think so. And what little I have left. And you'll enjoy the discussion and the round table there. He's also found on the Court Square. And make sure that you swing in there and see him. You can visit our friends over at the Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard in West Plains. For lunch, if you swing by there, you can get pizza and buffet virtually every day at lunchtime. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick with us.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
All right. Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now. Thanks for joining us. If you're catching up to our second half of our show here, we are in the third segment. It's a runover from our first two segments on the PACT. But I got to tell you, I think this issue of the PACT is so critically important to our upcoming electoral window here in 2014 that I am imploring you to help me to get this idea off the ground. I'd like to see it employed in every precinct, every election, every federal, state, local, regional, citywide election. The beautiful part of this thing is that it eliminates, oh, I shouldn't say eliminates. What it does is it fits across all genres and all sized elections. It makes no difference whether this is a citywide election or whether this is a national election. It works for the governor. It works for the mayor. It works for the city council member. It works for the state representative. It works for the federal senator. It works for the state senator. It works for anyone in any elected position whatsoever. You just migrate the terms to be commensurate with that role or that position. Now, by the way, this works for the attorney general and the secretary of state for your state. This works for lieutenant governor. I mean, the goal here is that any elected position can be held to the terms of a contract. Now, I've had some people say, well, wait a second now. Why would a candidate willingly sign up for an election or sign up for a PACT like this that is going to, for all intents and purposes, limit them? Well, the truth of the matter is that's up to the electorate to demand it. In other words, if you want our support, if you want our vote, this is what we're requiring of you. The idea is that we can avoid some of the problems and the complexities that we've got in our electoral system, and at the same point in time, avoid the lengthy and the arduous processes of going through constitutional amendments, of having to open our Constitution up from the idea of the principle of the Convention of States, which, you know, some people are predicting runaway constitutions because it's uncharted territory. We have no idea what it holds. Even those who are the most arduously supporting that, you know, Convention of States concept, they cannot guarantee us that these people, once in place, can't, for all intents and purposes, run amok. Now, I know that there are many states that are putting limitations in place that would say, as an example, that if you were an elected delegate and you violated the terms of what your state legislator sent you there to do, that you could be charged even criminally. However, you know, there's some question as to what are the constitutionalities of that, and damage once done cannot be retracted. So our goal here should be to find a solution that has zero startup time, is grassroots by its very nature, and is effective immediately. And it's effective, period. Remember that you can waive, and a candidate can waive their right to run. They can waive their right to continue in an incumbency. They can waive their right to vote on a bill they haven't read. Now, some people may say, well, that, you know, once a candidate does that, they're automatically they should be disqualified. Well, that's true, but we've got a Congress full of them right now, ladies and gentlemen, who are doing exactly that. And nobody seems to be able to touch them. They have become Teflon people. They're untouchable. 86% of them will get reelected in 2014 if numbers and statistics from past history hold true. Can you imagine even 80% of the current crop of traders and carpetbaggers that are going to get reseated into the same position that they've been utilizing to betray us for, in some cases, decades now? You've got to be kidding me. Our goal and our need is to end this, and to end it in a way that gives us the power back. Okay. So the idea of eliminating money from elections, essentially, once you've rejected lobbyist money, you don't have a war chest to run, even for your single one, re-election. In other words, if you're a state representative, let's say, and you agree that you're only going to run for 2 terms. Now, in my state, we have term limits. And you can run twice for the House, 2-year terms each, and then twice for the Senate. Well, with all due respect, that's 12 years in the Senate, and that's 4 years in the House, which constitutes 16 years. I mean, with all due respect, that is a career, number one. And number two, most of those people who do that then go on to run for something else. Either they go on to run for attorney general or, some other state-run position. Because at this point, they've become addicted to the ease, to the power, to the influence, to the respect that they engender in the community. And they're not going to give that up voluntarily. Just like a heroin addict is not going to take that needle out of his arm voluntarily. It's the truth, folks. This power that they have, this influence that they have, the getting the best seat in the restaurant when they stroll in, the owner of the store or the restaurant who runs up and says, "Mr. Senator, can I take your picture here with my wife so I can hang that on the wall?" The constant fawning, being treated to meals and trips and vacations, being given privileges that would astound the average citizen if they only knew the depth of the depravity that many of these candidates in all levels are receiving. The benefits are just extraordinary, folks. They are living the lives of dukes, duchesses, lords, and ladies. It's no wonder that they begin to view you as merely a stepping stone to achieve their own personal goals and agendas. So by pulling money out of these elections, by putting predefined term limits in there and rejecting the lobbyist campaign, re-election campaign funding, you essentially have a challenger who, in the eyes of the electorate, has an immediate credibility factor. In other words, if I'm running against an incumbent, I'm saying, look, folks, he's running with corruption money, and I'm not running with all of that money, but I've got something here that shows that you won't have to try to oust me in 4 more years, assuming I'm running for a House seat, 1 term of 2 years and a second term of 2 years. In 4 years, I'm out of here on my own. You're not going to have to pry me away with a crowbar. You're not going to have to pry me out of here at gunpoint. I'm committing to you in advance that I'm going to go. And if at any point in time I begin to break my promise, or I violate any of the terms and the tenets of the agreement which we've outlined here, then for all intents and purposes, you don't need to go to the process of putting through a recall. All you have to do is my accountability partners sign date the pre-executed agreement, and I'm out. I'm finished. I'm done. I now have to explain to the press why my accountability partners have determined that I have violated my agreement with my constituencies. The beautiful part about eliminating these constitutional or amendments that would be required to get things like term limits. Now, as I said, in my state, we have constitutional state term limits. But I can tell you that it's my experience that many of the people who run, they run their 2 terms, then they move on to another seat and they run those terms. Then they become something else. They become the director of parks or conservation, or they become some other position where they actually never leave public service. And I use that term with sarcasm and derision because it's not public service. It's self-service at the public's expense. The beautiful part of this is that it doesn't take a constitutional amendment to go through an electoral cycle. It doesn't require all the grassroots effort. It doesn't require the opposition and the endless campaigning against it by those who oppose it. It doesn't require anyone to vote at all. Quite frankly, the voters, the electorate, are voting with their demand. They're voting in advance. They're voting by saying, if you sign this agreement, if you sign the pact, you have my vote. If you don't sign the pact, I'll do everything in my power to make sure that you are not the elected. By the way, the beautiful part of this would be both ideological candidates running out the pact themselves, wouldn't it? In other words, you have a Democratic and a Republican Party candidate both running for the same seat, both having signed a pact. Now you've got something. Now you got a horse race, folks. Because, you see, and the truth is, if we can get this thing off the ground, if we can spread it to a broad enough base, and especially in this election window, it can catch like wildfire. And if it does catch like wildfire, and it does run virally across the nation, you'll see it popping up in all kinds of elections, whether they be, county commissioner. I mean, you'll see these kinds of PACs popping up in virtually every elected slot. The problem that we have is that public service is I gotta say it's the number one misused oxymoron in the English language. The vast majority of people who are in there are not actually serving the public. They are serving themselves. There are exceptions. And I know that if you're a current politician and you're hearing this, you are gnashing your teeth and you are clenching your fists. That's not true, you say. Well, with all due respect, you are already compromised because you're in a position and you now look at it from a perspective that is outside the bubble, or you're inside the bubble and you are only seeing your own reflection back, and it's skewed because it's done on a convex lens. You see, we're looking at you from the outside and we see nothing but, the endless desire to try to accommodate all sides of an issue and never take a stand. We see the wind bend you one way or the other, depending upon whether you're talking to a friendly crowd or a hostile crowd. We see you utilize the perfected political doublespeak that makes a lot of words tumble out and nothing of substance in their meaning. And we're tired of it. And the best way to accomplish your end, and with all due respect, you may have the best of intentions, but the best way to remove you and set a new threshold, a new platform of entry into the political game is where you're committing in advance to be honor bound, to have integrity, and then you have some teeth to hold you there. That's the difference. Everyone enters with the promise that I'm going to do the right thing. Almost none leave that way. We have an opportunity to hold them accountable here. And it's up to us to do this. The results are immediate. No recalls, no endless impeachment processes, no scorched earth damage to the electorate or to the body politic when they can't get their way. I mean, think about that guy in Chicago who was trying to sell Obama's seat. Can't think of his name, the guy with the hairdo. I mean, that guy was doing all kinds of damage, and the other guy in Detroit, the guy who was the mayor over there in Detroit, dragged his case through the courts, cost the taxpayers untold hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of dollars, only to be convicted at the end, tossed out of office, thrown in jail, out of jail, back into office, I think he even went. And if not him, Marion Barry, in Washington, D.C., caught smoking crack, and he ran and became mayor a second time. I mean, come on, people. If a candidate violates the terms of the contract, the accountability partners merely vote in a majority that the breach has occurred. They can date the fully executed resignation letter, and that candidate is out. He's also besmirched his own reputation to do anything else. Remember that there's a certain level of respectability that goes with being in political office. And they should be held to a higher standard. They should hold themselves to a higher standard. And don't, generally. I mean, they do when they first get in. But after a while, they'll do almost anything to retain that position, but without any of the strings of accountability tied to it. And so, a person who leaves office under the conditions of a forced resignation, a pre-executed resignation, would have an enormous amount of explaining to do to try to run for a different office, number one. Number two, there's a certain amount of behavioral response that would, it's almost like the concept of a deterrent that is so strong that it approaches the principles of MAD, right? In other words, no candidate wants to be publicly humiliated. Their business will fail, or whatever business they might get into, and they can't run for office again. They go back home to a community that looks at them with disdain. There are some real values to the psychological impact of being committed to a contract that you can be called on any time. Now, there are some questions I've had from some people. What happens when an accountability partners group determines that a candidate has violated the trust? Right? They serve the resignation letter, that person's out. Now, what do you do to fill the seat? Well, I recognize that every district and every state and every federal seat is going to be a little bit different, depending on how the state rules are set up. In some cases, the governor would appoint a candidate to fill the vacancy. In some cases, it depends on how far the term has gone, and so forth and so on. There may be instances where ultimately a special election will have to be held. But the truth of the matter is that, with all due respect, I'd rather go through that little bit of grief and aggravation and trouble than to have a candidate in there for the next 3 or 2 or even 1 year who is wreaking havoc upon our state or our government or our city or our community or our county or our federal government. You see, the point is that while they're in office, they can do an enormous amount of damage. The whole premise of impeachment is not to remove that person from office, but simply to stop their behavior. It's not a punishment. It's a limiting factor. Impeachment doesn't guarantee a removal of the president. We saw that with Bill Clinton. He was impeached and he remained in office. He'd have to resign. In this case, a president who would sign an accountability pact in order to get into that office, do you think for a moment that the accountability partners of Barack Obama would not have already called him? Think about it. If they were accountability partners right now who were the accountability team for Barack Hussein Obama, would we even be having this conversation? It's highly unlikely. Asking these candidates to willingly do what we know is beyond human capacity when you are, for all intents and purposes, seduced in such a strong and universal manner, is a little bit like expecting, people to do the impossible. Because we've allowed money and corruption to enter the system, and enter it so strategically, so integrally, that we cannot get beyond it at this point unless we force the candidates to do it, or we pass laws that prohibit it. And since the people who are currently in place have to pass those laws, we can't expect that to happen. So we have to be creative enough to figure an end run way to go back in and bring the problem back to our control. We cannot wait for our candidates to finally get the integrity and the honor and the courage of their convictions to do the right thing by us. And the truth is, because at this stage in the game, our idea of what's right and their jaded view of what's right will never meet again. Like East meets West, it'll never happen. They've already lost any perspective that you or I have. And so the right solution here is not to try to force them to pass laws which are against their own best interest. The right solution here is to put people in place who will honor their commitments up front, and we can hold them to it when they violate it. Okay, I want to hear your feedback on the PACT. Now, I've had some responses already. I've put this in writing, and I'll try to get this posted up on AVN. But I also I want to make it a draft because I want to make it a living, working document. I'm looking to put this in place immediately, people. And I want your help to accomplish that. If there's any lawyers out there, especially a constitutional attorney, and you catch this show, please offer your services. I'd love to work with you on this. You can contact me by sending me an email to Mike at americasvoicenow.org. Please put in the subject line, The PACT, so I know what it's about. I save those in a separate file so that I can find them and quickly address them. It's Mike at americasvoicenow.org. If you have someone that you think would be helpful or assistive in this process, and it's not you, but it's someone that you have influence with or communication with, please share this series of videos with them. Let's see if we cannot get this PACT off the ground this election cycle, 2014, where we can make a significant impact and a significant level of difference. I believe that this is our last opportunity to try to rein in a government out of control. We have this one window of opportunity here in 2014 to try to reset the buttons before this particular monster has left our control completely. 2016 is too far away. I'm not sure at the current pace we're moving we'll get to 2016. So we can do this now. We just have to work at it creatively and hard. And I'm asking for your help. Mike at americasvoicenow.org. Okay, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, I'm going to try to jam the NSA and the rise of the police state and the Obamacare bailout topics into the same segment, because otherwise we're going to we're never going to get to them. Okay. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Find us at americasvoicenow.org. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/America's Voice Now, youtube.com/America's Voice Now, and Patriot FB, like Facebook, patriotfb.com. We'll be back in just a moment. If you're a new listener to America's Voice Now, I apologize for sounding like Kermit the Frog here, but I was bitten by some flu over the course of the weekend, and I apologize, but I am definitely very froggy, so forgive me, but I'll try to get back on my game before the end of the week. Not much control I have over that, but I'll do my best. Okay, there's a group of stories that are out today, and I've posted them all up on America's Voice Now. So if you're catching this on YouTube, I also post all these stories down in the comment section or the subject section. so you don't have to take my word for it. I want you to be a critical thinker. I want you to utilize your own due diligence to take the stories which I kind of throw out there as examples of what's wrong. Do your own homework, formulate your own opinions, both look at all the information, pro and negative, pro and con, and then draw your own conclusions and formulate your own opinions. Those opinions, once you've grown them, once you've nurtured them, and they've matured, are unshakable. And you're in a much better position to know where you stand on a given issue, and then to be able to defend it when you are communicating with others, educating others around you within your circle of influence, or even just making decisions about who to vote for. Where should you stand on a given issue? How should you stand on a given political issue or on a specific politician? Information is power. And I recognize that a lot of people are very, very busy. We don't all have time to sit around and hunt down and dig up all these stories and do all that. So that's one of the things that I do as a part of this program. I want to make sure that, I'm throwing out there these topics and issues which I think are important. So I draw them from mainstream media sources, and one of the phrases that I use is, as America's Voice mantra, is that we expose mainstream media propaganda for what it is and expose the truth. Because more often than not, alternative media doesn't necessarily have all the investigative powers that the mainstream media does. Your job is to take that mainstream media story and identify where you're being misled and misrepresented and what's being fed to you as propaganda, and to put it in a proper perspective so that you read between the lines and understand what you're seeing. The New York Times has an article out this morning about how the NSA has devised radio pathways into computers. Now, people say, well, what's so world-shaking about that? They've got access to your personal tracking device, that thing you carry on your hip. Yeah. By the way, stop referring to these as mobile phones. Begin calling them your NSA-sponsored personal tracking device, your PTD, because ultimately that's what this is. And if you don't want to call it the NSA PTD, you can call it the FBI PTD, because domestically the FBI does the dirty work for the NSA. If you don't believe me, that's on you, but that is the truth. Your personal tracking device gives them all access to all of your information. They have backdoor holes into every computer you own, every tablet you own. And here, they're exposing the fact that since 2008 and even earlier, they have been inserting secret methodologies to be able to gain access into computers that aren't even connected to the internet. They're doing that by using microcircuit boards and USB-type devices, like wireless devices, that are embedded in the computer that you don't even know are broadcasting. Now, the question, of course, is, well, this is only used for foreign nationals and important people. I don't know. Is it? I mean, most computers today, virtually all laptops, come with Wi-Fi built in. Do we know for a fact that Wi-Fi is not transmitting when we don't think it is? I mean, we only just found out that the FBI can turn on your camera remotely, or we got confirmed. I shouldn't say we just found that out. I've suspected this for years, and I've talked about it. But we got confirmation that the FBI can turn on your camera in your laptop remotely and never turn the light on, so you don't even know it's being broadcast. It's broadcasting. That they can remotely activate not only the camera in your personal tracking device, but also the audio ports, so that they can listen to this conversation as we're having it, even though I don't believe the phone is on. In fact, the phone doesn't even have to be on. Imagine that. Now, we know for a fact that they've been able to do this because this came out back in, I think it was the late 90s when the FBI was caught doing this because they got a crime family that way. They turned the guy's cell phone on remotely in some crime family syndicate meeting, I think the guy was in Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken. I've forgotten the name of the family. But the point is, these guys were all sitting there with their phones sitting out on the desk, and they were talking about, yo, you whacked Joey. Yeah, we whacked that guy. Yeah, you gave me the order, I did it. They turned the guy's cell phone on remotely, captured the conversation, and used it to convict him. So we know this is going on. How do we know that these USB cards and tiny circuit boards aren't being remotely turned on? We don't. And we don't even know that they aren't being inserted by the manufacturer at the behest of the whatever agency is making the call. In fact, we found out last week that the NSA and the FBI have been diverting packages from FedEx and UPS and the Postal Service, embedding software and hardware into computer systems destined for whomever the target was. So when the target gets it, they open it up and they think, hey, this is straight from Dell. This is straight from Hewlett-Packard. This is straight from Samsung. This is straight from Apple's iPhone store. Well, not so much. And the software can remotely transmit all of the information they want, giving them 100% remote control. We know for a fact that Microsoft has given the backdoor keys to the NSA as far back as the 90s. So the problem is not just one of being foolish about our own security. This is blatant subversion. And it's only one example of many. There's an article in the Washington Post this morning. Border Patrol drones are being borrowed by other agencies more often than previously accounted for. Well, that doesn't surprise me, but it should surprise some people who are just, walking about in these complete and utter unconscious states of apathy. For the record, the FAA has not even completed the rules of drone applications in the United States. And yet they're already projecting 30,000 of them to be in play in a matter of a couple of years, and as many as 100,000 by the end of by 2020. The truth is, by the end of 2020, I think that's an underestimate. The point is that with all of these drones out there, what privacy do we have? What are the rules surrounding it? Well, there aren't any, and they don't want to put any on there because the truth is, they want to use them and misuse them. And we know for a fact that government with power and knowledge and information in their hands will misuse it without fail. In one manner or another, to one degree or another. But misuse it they will. Now the spy court, a judge just came out the other day, and this is in Associated Press. The U.S. judiciary, this is the entire U.S. judiciary now, right? Told Congress on Tuesday that they oppose the idea of having an independent privacy advocate on the secret foreign intelligence surveillance court. You're kidding. So what we're saying is there should be some sort of an ombudsman here that represents the interests of the people who oversees what goes on the FISA court. And this privacy advocate should act as an ombudsman to say, hey, wait a second, stop right there. We don't think that that's constitutional. And the entire U.S. judiciary, and this isn't me saying this, this is the article itself, speaking for the entire U.S. judiciary, U.S. District Judge John D. Bates sent a letter to the Senate Intelligence Committee. That's an oxymoron, isn't it? Sent a letter to the Senate Intelligence Committee saying that appointing an independent advocate to the secret surveillance court is unnecessary and possibly counterproductive. And he slammed other key reforms as adding too heavy a caseload to the secret court's work. In FISA court hearings, judges only hear from the government seeking a spy warrant. Hello? Hello? Did I hear that right? So you only want to hear one side of the story. How does that position and justice coexist? How does that position and the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment and the First Amendment coexist? I mean, for all intents and purposes, that attitude and the present state of affairs and the idea of liberty and freedom based on the First and Fourth and Fifth Amendments, and for that matters, the Sixth Amendment as well, and the Eighth Amendment, are so diametrically opposed that, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the equivalent of matter and antimatter trying to occupy the same space. It cannot occur. It's the equivalent of having an ATF and a Second Amendment. The two are constantly at war. The ATF's sole function and goal is to eviscerate the Second Amendment. And the Second Amendment's goal is to constantly give people the tools and the liberty and for all intents and purposes, the weapons they need to be able to preserve their own liberty from tyranny and despotism. The two are diametrically opposed, like matter and antimatter. They cannot coexist within the same space and time. Or what happens when you put matter and antimatter together? A titanic explosion. There's an article in the Daily Caller. GOP leader reveals a strategy for the immigration bill push. Contrary to what the vast majority of America wants, these people don't care. They're going to go out and do what they want to do because they've already sold their souls to the devil of major industry and corporate America, who have paid them to make sure that they bring in cheap labor. It's not about the skilled labor argument. There's plenty of Americans who are highly skilled and can't find a job. The truth of the matter is, it's not that they don't want the skilled American. They don't want the paycheck that the skilled American wants. They want to pay the lower rate that someone who's an immigrant is willing to accept for that same work. Because they've come from poorer origins and more humble beginnings, and they're willing to live 4 or 5 or 6 of them in a 2-bedroom apartment. Because they were living 8 of them in one room with barely running water and no electricity. And now they come to the fabulous United States, and the fact that they can each have their own bed is amazing. Do some of you find that offensive? Too bad. Because the truth is, that, ladies and gentlemen, is what corporate America is attempting to do. This isn't about Americans who won't do the job. This is about corporations who won't pay Americans to do the job because they see a cheaper methodology of obtaining that same level of labor through immigration. The GOP's leadership will try to persuade GOP legislators to back an immigration plan that includes, they started out with the word tighter enforcement, but we all know that that's a chimera. That is a red herring. It's a false promise. An effective amnesty for 12 million people and more immigrant workers to come in under chain migration. Now, what we'll hear, and I guarantee you when you read this plan, when it's finally issued, here's what will happen. They'll promise greater security and border enforcement. But it's all lies and misrepresentations. It's couched in legalese so that they've got a 1,000,009 loopholes. Because these people have already sold your birthright for their bowl of Esau's soup. They've willingly given you the shaft. They've sold you out so that they can do the bidding of their corporate masters. And mark my word, corporate masters they are. We live in a corporatocracy, a.k.a. a fascist police state. You don't see it because the mainstream ministry of propaganda is not willing to expose you to the truth yet. But the truth of the matter is, we are already there. How do I know that? Because corporations make all the rules. And they utilize government and police power of government to enforce their intentions, their agendas, their edicts upon us. And ladies and gentlemen, that's a dangerous, dangerous place for us to be. The truth of the matter is, these representatives, GOP or liberal or progressive or Democrat or Republican, makes no difference. They are all on the same side. And that side is not your side. That side is their own personal improvement, whether it be financial, power, money, influence. I don't care what it is. Or, at the very, very best of scenarios, they have good intentions, but they've been compromised and co-opted by the NSA or the FBI with skeletons in their closet, and they will do anything to keep them secret. Mark my words. Congress came out the other day and asked the NSA, "Are you spying on Congress?" And the NSA said, "Why, of course, you're just like everybody else." Really? We're going to accept that? That our legislators can be spied upon so that their transgressions, regardless of how real or fabricated they may be in their own constructs in their minds, that those can be utilized to manipulate them? I mean, everybody's got a skeleton of some sort. Don't tell me you don't. I believe you do. Everyone does. What is that skeleton that we don't want known? What would a politician not want out? That he did a deal with a real estate developer and then made sure that there were highway funds to build a highway that ran right by that piece of property? Maybe it's that they're doing insider trading with inside knowledge, which for a little while there, they actually passed, when it became public knowledge, they passed the limitation on their ability to do that. And then as soon as everybody turned their back, they rescinded that and gave themselves permission to trade on inside information. Ladies and gentlemen, how unconscionable is that? People are sitting in prison for that. A lot of them. And Congress does it with impunity and immunity. But they sure don't want that information exposed because it might ruin their re-election opportunity. They can't be jailed for it, but it might ruin their opportunity to run for re-election. So all the powers that be have to do is apply pressure in the right area. Congressman so-and-so, we know. And here's the photographs to prove it, that you've got a problem with cocaine. Because we've got photographs of you with a straw up your nose at a party over in Georgetown. Or we've got photographs of you with someone who is not your husband or not your wife in a compromising position. Tell me that you believe. Let me rephrase that. Tell me that you are naive enough to think that if a congressman had to be gotten to, someone couldn't put the right situation in place for that congressperson to be compromised in some way, shape, or form that may not necessarily be illegal, but would completely devastate their professional and personal life. I'm not saying every man would succumb to a come on from a hired operative, but I'm saying that there's a significant enough portion of them that will, that it's already happened. These people have been co-opted. And so, therefore, they cannot represent us. Because in order to represent us, they have to be free of the coercion. The DHS has funded these police surveillance cameras, and yet there's no drop in crime. But cities are building these surveillance grids to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars. Listening posts on every light pole, as was done in Seattle and many other cities, including Las Vegas. Cameras on every corner. All based on the threat of crime, the tenor of fear. And yet, crime is not falling. But your freedoms, your ability to feel confident that you can have a conversation with someone, the way in which we communicate has already been dramatically and vastly impacted. Tell me that it has not crossed your mind as you were on your personal tracking device with someone and having a conversation, that it has not crossed your mind at some point in the last 3 or 4 months that, oops, that might have been something that someone would listen to. Because you used a phrase that may be misconstrued or mistaken for something else. Tell me. We live in a climate of fear. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how a police state and tyranny rise to power. It makes the principles and the concepts of the PACT all the more imperative. Because we need people in positions of authority and representative leadership that will actually enable us to regain control of this military, industrial, surveillance, spy, and despotic system. This complex, this web. And we don't have a whole lot of time left. Please provide me with your feedback on our and comments on our segments today. If you'd like to comment on the PACT concepts, I'd love to hear it. I hope you took some notes and you had some intelligent questions that you wanted to, or ideas that you wanted to pose. You can do so by sending me email at mike@americasvoicenow.org. Okay, I do want to thank our sponsors, the battery station over in West Plains. Outstanding place they're one of the biggest battery distributors in the country, folks. And you can find all kinds of electronic gear there, and they carry a ton of stuff that's not on their website. You can get to their website by going to batterystation.com. You can also call them at 417-257-7799. Please make sure that you tell anyone that you speak to with any of our sponsors that you heard about them on America's Voice Now, because that helps them to understand the value of their advertising here. Make sure that you visit our friend Jason Henry over on Court Square in West Plains, 256-4100. An excellent attorney, handles both criminal and civil issues, both federal and state. So if you've got a case that you need to deal with, give him a call. I'm sure he'll be happy to help you. The Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop over on the square in West Plains as well. You can reach them at 417-257-1776. Also, while you're there, you can get your haircut cut over at Wits End Classic Barbershop, and they're open late on Thursday evenings as well, and Friday night as well. Great place to get your family haircut, and if you take your kid in there, their first haircut's free. Make sure that you see our friends over at Pizza Hut as well on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. Thank you so much for for listening to America's Voice and having me into your home this morning, or your car, or on your mobile phone, or your personal tracking device. And we'll see you tomorrow morning bright and early. Have a great day. You can find us at americasvoicenow.org. You can find us at facebook.com/America's Voice Now, youtube.com/America's Voice Now, and also patriotfb.com. Thanks to our friends over at 99.3 Big Country 99 in South Central Missouri.